the third session. This afternoon's first session is entitled Safety Data, an Enabler to an Informed Safety Policy. Just culture is an enabler of safety data, and without safety data we will make poor decisions for the future. So I'm delighted to be able to introduce our first speaker on the panel today. The speakers will, as usual, be in the order in which their names appear here, and we have our token woman, Patricia Hayes, UK Director General Civil Aviation, Director General of Civil Aviation at the Department for Transport. So here we have a senior civil servant with her views on things. You have the floor.
Thank you. I think a token woman and a senior civil servant is not how I would have chosen to be introduced, but there we go.
Accurate, though.
Hello, everybody. Hello, men and women in the audience. So I had a slightly early start this morning, I have to say. To get here from London before the beginning of the conference, my bedside alarm went off for the second day in a row at 3:30 a.m. And my lovely husband, my husband's a senior hospital doctor, so we're used to keeping slightly odd hours as a family. My poor husband turned to me and said, "Would you like a cup of tea?" So he went downstairs, made a cup of tea. I started getting my act together. And as he was delivering the cup of tea, he turned to me and said, "Darling, what exactly is it you're doing today?" And I said, "Well, darling, I'm off to Brussels to talk about just culture, use of data, non-blame environment and good safety systems." And do you know, he almost dropped the tea. And he said, "For goodness sake, you aviation people, could you just shut up about your safety systems? Us medical types are so bored of you aviation people coming into our hospitals with your checklists, with your systems, with your processes, with your just bleeding cultures, and telling us how we should be doing our jobs." And I think, I did get the tea in the end. And I also left in time to catch my plane. But it was quite interesting to hear from another senior professional, a senior professional I know quite well, how the profile of the aviation industry as a leader in safety is really out there, up to the point of being quite irritating. And I take that as being a marker of the success that we're achieving in this room. Although on no grounds do I see it as a reason to be complacent, because I think we've got a lot more to do. So I've got a few slides on the UK experience of using data within a just culture environment. Before I get into my slides, though, I'd like just to make two reflections on things that I heard this morning. The first is, I thought we were getting into a very interesting territory just before lunch in talking about some of the tensions between transparency and confidentiality and the role of the media in ventilating and publicising theories or facts about what's going on in accidents. And I was interested in that conversation because back at my team, we've been focusing a lot over the last couple of weeks on a very bad air show accident that we had at Shoreham a couple of weeks ago. I just mixed up Farnborough and Shoreham and made them one other word. Farnborough is where our air accident investigation branch is, and I went down there last week and had a look at the work that's being done on the investigation. And one thing that's really characterised that investigation is how much data has been provided by members of the public who were at the air show or on the road. Photographs, videos, eyewitness accounts. Public engagement in things that go wrong in our industry is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to give a richer set of evidence about what goes on. And I think we need to see it in that vein. It's not a threat. It's not something that we want to wish away. It's with us and can help us do our jobs better. The other interesting observation for me from this morning was around the balance between the regional and global approach to changing cultures in safety. And it just struck me looking around the room that many of the businesses or organizations that lots of us represent have got relationships with commercial relationships or organizational relationships with other organizations from around the world. And it'd be really interesting to see how we could use that, use those relationships, use those working ties to drive cultural change across what is a global industry and a set of interactions which doesn't really make sense to contain within a regional level. So those are my two observations from this morning. And that leaves me about 5 minutes to do my actual presentation. But fortunately, because I know you were all paying attention this morning, I don't need to recap too much on what a just culture is, because you know that. We're here to talk about data, and data, if these are the elements of the just culture, data is about the boxes, I guess, which are called reporting, so the collection of the basic information to drive the safety systems, and about informed, so the use of that data, the application of analytical tools in order to understand results. And I think I'm interested in the reflection that most of our discussion this morning has been in the reporting box. So we've been talking quite a lot about the cultural and organizational preconditions to allow data to be collected, but we've not said a lot yet about what we do with it once we get it or how it's analyzed. And I think that's something that we'll get into in this session. First, the next slide. Oops.
I think you might have it.
There we go. Oh, I've got it here. Sorry. The next slide, though, is about focuses just for a moment more on why we might not get the data that we need. And most of this is repeating ground that we covered this morning, but I think there are one or two points that are worth drawing out. The key one is around communication and feedback. We all know within our own organizations that we're constantly being asked to provide feedback on things that we would like to be different or ways in which we think our managers are not doing their job properly. And we also know that as human beings, if we provide that feedback constantly and we can't see any action being taken on behalf, as a response to that, the next time we're asked the same question, we won't answer it or we won't put as much effort into answering it. And exactly the same human dynamic is there in the work that we do as regulators. So unless what we do with the data we get is seen and can seem to be, a difference can be seen to be made on the ground, people are not going to go to the trouble or the effort of sharing that data with us. We also need to be very clear that any action we've taken, any punitive action we've taken, is transparent and clearly understood. Even if we haven't taken punitive action, if the perception is that we have, that's going to discourage people from providing data into the future. So we just need to make sure that people know what we've done with data, why we've done it, and if there are misapprehensions or misunderstandings of what we're up to, we need to be energetic and proactive in putting them right. So what does the work that we've done in the UK, what have we done in the UK and what are the trends that we're seeing in terms of reporting? So this is a very simple chart of the number of reports that UK CAA, and by the way, can I just do a quick shout out to Sean and Porrig sitting in the middle from UK CAA, who have done fantastic work on this and helped me with this presentation. So UK CAA have pulled together this data on the occurrence reports since 2005, and what you're seeing is what looks superficially to be a fairly steady upward trend. In fact, that wouldn't be what you would see in this chart, because what we're seeing in this upward trend is not an increase in the number of occurrences, but an increase in levels of reporting. And we can be fairly confident about that, because within those overall numbers, we're seeing the numbers of high severity incidents remaining relatively stable. So it's good news, I think, that we're getting more data points, which is allowing us to do more analysis and find out what's going on. But there are gaps in what the data is able to tell us and the extent to which it's able to drive action. And those gaps come in a number of places. First, in terms of the coverage. So we say in the slide there are some topics on which we might expect to see more data than we are getting through the system. And in the past, those have included fatigue reporting, ground handling. Where we're seeing the number of data points not meeting our expectations, we're pushing out topic-by-topic initiatives aimed at improving reporting practice in those areas, and those are starting to show some results. We're also struggling in the database to differentiate where the reports are coming from, and getting a clearer idea of who in the system, who in the aviation system, is most likely to report will give us a clearer sense of where action needs to be taken. Finally, we're really interesting to distinguish between whether people are reporting technical faults or whether they're reporting behaviours that they're seeing on the part of their colleagues. For us, the more that we're seeing behavioural issues being reported and the less that we're seeing technical faults, which I think are fairly easy to do, that for us is a marker of it being a mature, just culture system. And it would be interesting to see those two different kinds of reports changing over time. But that's an overall picture of what we've seen so far. Just 2 slides left. The next sets out what we think this data can usefully be used to do. And we heard a lot of that this morning from organisations and companies about how data can be used to inform action within an organisation. The same is true as regulators, both at a national and an international level. And I think this is the point in the presentation at which I say the UK is fully supportive of the EASA attempts to move into a big data space here. The higher level of data we can aggregate, the better informed we'll all be about how to take forward safety improvements for our industry. So we think that's a great initiative and we're fully committed to participating in taking it forward. Finally, everybody else has had a story. Here's mine. And I think this is a really good story because it's a classic case where a difference of understanding led to a safety risk which was flagged by data and resolved by communication. So you can read it for yourselves, but I'll give you the brief outline. This is a story about Rio, where we were having a problem. A UK operator was having a consistent problem on the approach into Rio. We were having 1 report every 6 flights, which is an incredibly high number of reports. And what the operator was seeing was, as they were getting close to Rio, they were finding themselves unexpectedly being vectored straight towards a mountain. The data showed us that this was a problem. So we had a conversation with the Brazilians. We sat down round a table and in a no-blame spirit, tried to work through why were these surprises happening to this operator as they were coming into the airport, and what was going on. And it turned out to be really quite a simple thing. The air traffic controllers were trying to be helpful. They were trying to offer a more efficient route in the approach to the airport. They were trying to help the airline, save a bit of fuel. Once they got the message that it was actually less important for the airline to save that little bit of fuel on the approach than it was to know what they were going to expect as they were coming in from the airport, we were able to have a change in procedures. The problem was resolved, and the level of reporting went down from 1 every 6 flights to 1 every 6 weeks. Big change. Really practical resolution of a problem. And I guess shows that communication, data sharing, an open culture, and a degree of trust can solve problems using a just culture environment. That's all I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Patricia. Really interesting point that you brought in straight away, which is, we talked about trust a lot as being an essential part to encourage reporting, and i.e. it's the message that you're not going to shoot the messenger. There's that motivation, but there's the other one that Patricia brought up so ably today, which is if the messenger thinks that nothing useful will happen to the message, you won't bother with it, and that's really important. Have we got any questions for Patricia before we move on? Questions from the floor for Patricia? Yes, we got one over there.
Hi Patricia, it's Jared Kelly from the Ryanair Pilot Group. I just want to ask a question because you put it up on the screen regarding fatigue. In your experience, have you ever seen an airline that doesn't have any reports of fatigue in its history? And if that was the case, would you find that unusual? And what steps would you take to investigate that if it was unusual?
Thanks very much for the question. I love the way the light went off just to stop me answering the question. But I'm just going to exploit the fact that I've got colleagues from UK CAA sitting in the audience, because they will be able better to give you an informed answer to that question than me.
Thank you. I thought I was just going to sit here comfortably. Thanks very much. The reporting of fatigue is recognised by most involved, I think, as a challenge, because the number of contributory factors that can influence a pilot wanting to report fatigue are quite dramatic. The reason that we identify fatigue as a particular issue in the slides is that anecdotal evidence and stories we hear as far as the levels of fatigue compared to the number of occurrence reports we receive relating to fatigue are dramatically different. And we recently undertook a study co-funded with BALPA actually, where we got the London School of Economics to survey pilots to try and establish what the barriers were to reporting, and one specific area within that report was to do with fatigue. So the idea that an airline would never have any pilots that have any fatigue, I think everybody here would agree that's extremely unlikely. As far as giving you facts and figures and data, I don't have those facts and figures and data, and that's why it's up on the screen, because it's an area we need to get better improvement, more clarity, I think.
Any further questions? Oh, right. Yes, we got one there.
Good afternoon. Philip von Schöppentau, European Cockpit Association. 2 points. One on fatigue. The European Cockpit Association did a survey, actually it's member associations, a few years ago among 6,000 pilots across Europe. And one of the outcomes was that 70% of fatigue incidents are actually not reported. And one of the main reasons was they're not confident that they can just make these reports. Second point, you talked about overseeing operators or organizations, and you mentioned on your slides inappropriate enforcement by NAAs and or EASA. Question, how can you actually, as an authority, you and other authorities, really assess whether a safety culture and a just culture is working in a company? It's about culture, it's about people. If you have very beautiful processes, good mechanisms, etc. in place, how can you as an authority assess that it really works? And linked to this, what do you think about the idea that some operators are already using, and this is external independent safety culture audits, where basically a company invites an external expert, come with a big mirror, talks to everybody in the company, and then actually advises the company to show how to improve the system, where it works well, where it could work better. And that could maybe be a tool also for the authority to then take into consideration when overseeing whether an organization is actually fulfilling the obligations under the current reporting regulation and under the operator's responsibilities under the EASA rules. Could that be a tool?
Thank you for both those points. I think on the first one, I think you're simply confirming the importance of understanding whether fatigue is being reported, and if it's not, understanding why not. Because as my colleague said, I think it's an important issue, and we need to make sure that we are capturing data where it can be captured. On the second, I think Patrick may want to come into this when he when he talks about the EASA rule, I think from my perspective, there are tools which do make it possible for you to take a view on an organisation's safety culture through scrutiny of its safety management system, through compliance with reporting obligations, through looking at the internal systems and processes which are used to interrogate and assimilate reporting. So I'm perhaps slightly more optimistic that there is a toolkit to allow you to have a reasonably good picture of an organisation's safety culture.
Thank you, Tricia, for throwing that ball to me. So there is no reason why a consultant would be better than an authority inspector at assessing the safety culture, honestly. And I think that one of the key challenges for all of us is going to be to move towards risk-based oversight. And in fact, when you look at risk-based oversight, there is, of course, a purely data-driven risk assessment, but there is also a subjective, driven risk assessment, of which the notion of, there are a certain number of indicators of how the safety culture is spread and how it is applied and things like that. It can be through interviews, it can be through a certain number of data, and that will be part of the risk assessment. So I'm like Tricia. I think we can be quite optimistic about how we are going to make sure that the safety culture is applied across the industry. And there will be, of course, best practices. There will be companies in which it's done in a different manner. And we hope to organize much more in the future, workshops where we can spread the best practices to show how things such as fatigue management, for instance, but also safety management systems. What are the best practices in some of the companies, and can those ideas be taken on board by other companies?
Thanks very much for that, Patrick. Any more from the floor before we go on? In fact, I'm going to hand it straight back to Patrick again if there are no further questions at that point. And Patrick Key, head of EASA, that we think of as being a regulator. He's the man who won my vote big time by going into a regulator and completely getting rid of the regulatory department. And so I think, there you go. Anyway, Patrick, the floor is yours.
So does it mean that I'm no longer a regulator? Maybe. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, we already heard this morning that aviation is the safest, air transport is the safest transport mode in the world. But the question I think we have to ask ourselves is whether or not aviation is safe enough, and whether or not we should be complacent and stop doing anything on safety, or if we should continue to invest on safety. And I'm pretty sure that 99.99% of the audience will agree on the fact that we need to do something. And the question is, since indeed we are a safe industry, in order to make progress on safety, how can we make progress when the number of incidents and accidents is so small, actually? And that's really a difficult question, because it's very difficult for us to base a new regulatory package, a new legislation or new actions just on one or two incidents. And really what I think we need to understand is that, and I will just repeat what Tricia said, the larger the amount of data we have on possible unsafe situations, the better our position will be to take the right measures in order to deal with it. And I really do think that this is an area where we need to continue to invest, and the just culture is part of that. But it's I should not say it's only a part of that, but it's part of a global system of gathering all types of safety information that we can get in order to become better. One of the, to come back to what David was saying, when EASA was created, there were, I think, in the first 10 years of the agency, most of the rulemaking activities were actually to put into EU law some of the rules which were under an intergovernmental format, under JAA framework. And I was very fortunate to arrive in the agency when this work was completed. And now that means that when we produce new regulations, we always have to ask ourselves, what is this regulation about? What are we trying to achieve? Do we increase the level of safety if we do that? And sometimes the answer is yes. Typically, the occurrence reporting regulation was clearly a good step forward in increasing the safety of the system. Sometimes the answer may be no. And speaking in particular with communities such as the general aviation community, and we will have a discussion about this later on. Sometimes, it's just information, it can be training, it can be education that will increase the level of safety, not necessarily regulation. And that means that, in fact, when we want to increase safety, we need to really identify what is the problem we are going to solve. And in order to identify that, we need to have data. And the data is coming from accidents, it's coming from incidents, it's coming from the just culture, reports of something which was unsafe. And I insist on the fact that the bigger the data sample is, the better our regulation or our action is going to be. For this reason, what we have decided to do in EASA is to have a rulemaking program which should be data-driven. It should also be following a European aviation safety plan, which is data-driven and which addresses the real issues that have created unsafe conditions. And of course, when you regulate, there is the other part of the cycle, which is how do you make sure that the regulations are properly implemented, and that's the oversight. We want to be risk-based, that's what I mentioned earlier, and in order to assess the risk, you need data as well. For all these reasons, it was mentioned by several speakers, including Tricia just now, we really do think that first, the occurrence reporting regulation will make a significant increase in the amount of and the quality of data that we will have at our disposal. But we believe that we need to do more, because when you look at unsafe conditions, it is rarely due to one single factor. Usually it's a string of factors which result in an unsafe condition. It can be maintenance, it can be training, it can be air traffic control, it can be weather, it can be the machines, it can be a certain number of things, which in isolation would not create an unsafe situation, but linked together, they create unsafe conditions. For this reason, we have undertaken a feasibility study for setting up a database, which would be big data. So a database which would process information on a systematic basis, not necessarily information which is linked to an accident or an incident. So typically what we would like to see in this database is the flight data monitoring data from airlines. We would like to see air traffic control data, weather data, systematically. And what should be the added value of such a database is that it will enable to identify trends where, we have unsafe situations. You mentioned the unstabilized approaches. Not all the unstabilized approaches lead to an incident, fortunately. But it's not extremely safe conditions. So why don't we have an analysis of all these unstabilized approaches and what are the contributing factors to those that can enable to solve those problems. So we really do believe that by building this database, actually it's been done by the FAA in the US, and there are already some, I think, very significant gains, benefits from what the FAA has told us on the increased level of awareness and safety across the US system. We would like to do the same, better, of course, because we are better. And we would like to link everything. Does it really make sense to have an incident or a safety database which is only dealing with ATM? Does it make sense to have a database which is only dealing with airline operations or airport operations? No, I think we need to link everything together. And that would be the value of this project. So we are currently discussing with Marcus and his colleagues in order to see how we could try to implement it, how we would fund it, and the setup of this system. Maybe one word on the safety culture and just culture. Again, I really do believe that it's not because you have an incident which is in database that you have captured all the unsafe conditions. And at the heart of the system there will always be the human operators, be it air traffic controllers, pilots, or maintenance engineers, ground handling agents, and so on and so forth. And if we are not able to capture in a way that needs to make sure that everybody feels comfortable with the framework, if we cannot capture, the feeling, it can be subjective, that from these operators that they were operating in an unsafe environment for different reasons, then we will miss, I think, a lot of information which will enable us to make progress. So the safety culture, the just culture are part of this big endeavor to build the best knowledge that we can have about the safety of the system. And it's only by increasing our knowledge of the system that we will increase the level of safety in aviation and do better than what we do today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Patrick. Questions from the floor for Patrick or anything else? We've got one here. We'll have one here, and then there's another one there in a moment.
Thank you for your speech. Mr. Key, we have the regulations are safety risk controls imposed by the European Commission, and we accept them and endorse. We have a little bit fragmented the way that the new regulations are amended. Will it be improve the system to make them available on consolidated versions more quickly? Because I'm involved in training, and it's very, very difficult to train new people and to keep updating the regulation system. Thank you.
It's a very good point, and I agree. And there is a lack of consolidation of our legislation, regulations into consistent packages. The question then is, do you consolidate according to a theme? Do you consolidate maintenance, for instance, or do you consolidate for a specific part of the industry? We have decided, because one of our priority areas was the general aviation sector, which was really having difficulties implementing very complex regulations. We have decided to go for packages of regulations which are consistent for one particular sector. We started with, I'm not sure it's the easiest when I see the amount of emails that I continue to receive on the subject. We started with the balloon industry, where we basically took all our regulations and we packaged them into a consistent balloon package. The idea would be to do the same with gliders and so on and so forth. So we would have, for operations, licensing, maintenance, for balloon, a consistent package. The other point is the changing pace of those regulations. As you understood, I think, we have decided to slow down our rhythm of regulations in order to enable, well, I'm sorry if your business is to train, but to make sure that you do not have too much business and that, when people are trained, they do not have to train 6 months later because the regulations are obsolete. And so we slow down the process, and I think it's quite well accepted for the moment.
You had a question back there. Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm Job. Hello, Patrick. I have a question for you, and that is the title of this conference is Saving Lives with Information. And I was questioning myself, well, who is actually saving lives here? I recall the days of 1999, and that was the date that ESA 2 was approved by the European Provisional Council. And since then we have been shipping data off towards our regulator and Eurocontrol. This was overtaken by 2096 and 1035, and so we're shipping thousands and thousands of data buckets to our regulator. I assume it's all ending up in a big European database, but it's beginning to look like a black hole to me because there's nothing coming back. So delivering all the data to you is nice, and I'm of course very interested to this big data thing, but it quizzes me. So who is actually saving lives? It seems to me for the moment it is the pilots and the ANSPs and the workers on the ground that are saving lives. It's not the rule makers, is it? So how are you going to get out of this conundrum? I hope that the Commission and EASA is rapidly feeding us back highly intelligent reports based on those data. I have a second question after this, but it's probably following your answer.
So you are giving me incentives to give as a neutral answer as I can do. No, if we did not believe that we are saving lives, honestly, we would not do what we do. Honestly. Regulating for the sake of regulating is not our business, both of Marcus and me, and Katalin as well. So, but it's easier, to count the lives lost than to count the lives saved. It's impossible to count. You cannot say. I gave the example earlier in the discussion about the number of fatalities for gliders, for instance. Okay. It's 22 fatalities for Europe in 2014, 22, which are 22 too many, I think. So then the question is, does it mean that we need regulations for gliders? Okay. But what would happen if we had no regulation for gliders? What would happen if we have anarchy in the skies with gliders? And I'm not sure we can answer this question. But what I guarantee to you is that whenever we are preparing a new legislation, we're asking ourselves what can be the impact in terms of lives saved when we have accident data, typically, or incident data. We do compute, if we have this legislation, how many accidents we would save. We also compute the costs of implementing such a measure. So in ATM, as you very well know, the number of accidents due to ATM as a single source of the accident, fortunately, is very low. Does it mean that we should not regulate ATM? That we should not continue to gather safety data on ATM? I don't think so, honestly. I don't think so. But on other topics, airworthiness, air ops, then I think that all the data that we get today through incidents, through accident reports, show that if we do not do something, then potentially there will be similar accidents of the same nature, and then we save life. So ATM is a particular type of business, I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Patrick. I sort of half knew the answer, of course, and indeed in ATM I think it's been less successful than in other areas. I wholeheartedly support the initiatives and the regulation as well, because I think you need data. But this leads me to the following question, and that is, I do not want my data to be analysed by lawyers from Cologne. I want to retain some ownership of my own data, and I want to have, I want to offer help by assisting you with the analysis on what are the real issues. Because my experience is that lots of data forms that we enter doesn't give you any clue of what actually happened. Many of the reports are something happened, and that won't be very useful to you. So I want to make sure that the industry is helping you out when doing the analysis, so that we get back lessons learned instead of more rules.
Which is what I was saying before. And it may be a very big disappointment to a number of you here, but in EASA, the number of lawyers is very small, actually. So most of the people are either engineers or pilots or air traffic controllers, so operational people. I'm not a lawyer myself, as you know. Okay.
Yes, we've got one from Jeff Poole here.
Thank you. Yes, Jeff Poole from Kenso. This is more of a comment than a question because it's something that Patrick and I spoke about this morning. Patrick was very clear that there's no value in having separate silos of information for ATM, airports, ground handlers, airlines, and so on. But I'd also make the plea that there's very little value in having a European database, an American database, and other regional and national databases. So, as with all things in big data, this is a classic area where global standards need to be used, and I think it's absolutely essential that ICAO are involved here, and that we produce a global safety database. So fully behind the work that Patrick is doing, but let's not create a European silo. And I think great example from Patricia, because her example was Rio, not the UK. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Any comment there before we move on, because we've got to get through there.
Patricia's example was in Brazil because there are no incidents in the UK, so it's the only story that she had. No, of course, and that's the reason why we are working with the FAA on our subject. There are, impracticalities, including legal impracticalities, when you have a framework in the US, which is very different from the framework in Europe. Typically, one of the difficulties in the US is that any information that the FAA has to be available to the public, which is creating a lot of different types of problems. But we are working hand in hand with the FAA and with ICAO, but we need to start to discuss with ICAO on this subject.
Okay, having said that, let's move on to ICAO. Katalin Radu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and to represent ICAO and to let you know what we are trying to do at the global level in ICAO in order to help not only Europe but the whole member states of ICAO. Why Europe should be interested in the outer world? Because more than 80% of the passengers that lost their lives in accident were in non-EU registered carriers outside European Union. So we should have a focus on what's happening outside and to try to come together to build a system that will protect our passenger and our citizen all over the world. In terms of the global framework, in order to exchange and to be able to share information, we need to have our framework in place to protect this information. And you might know that right now we are in a full process to amend the two annexes. Annex 13, accident investigation. We start in January putting in place the first amendment to the Annex 13. A group was established in beginning of 2014 to evaluate and to see exactly what are the enhanced provision and guidance material related to the protection of certain accident and incident records, and to see exactly how, under the framework of Annex 19, we can manage to have a better protection of our data. As you might see, the timelines, we just have 2 days ago the final review of the amendment. There is an internal process in ICAO, as you might know, and hopefully in March we will have the amendment adopted by the Council with applicability November 2016. For the Annex 19, we had our high-level safety conference at the beginning of the year, and based on the recommendation that comes from the high-level safety conference, we decided to harmonize the amendment of the Annex 19 with the work that has been done by the Safety Information Protection Task Force, mostly people coming with the legal background that consider that it's very important to have this view on the things that are happening, because we in the aviation world, we know that we need to protect our data, we need to take care of our data. But outside our world, it's the judicial system of each and every region, each and every state that might have a different or slightly different opinion on how those data should be manipulated and how those data should be protected. That's why, based on that, we had a discussion on the end of March between the two working groups, so the safety people from the Safety Management Panel and the SIP Task Force, and we started to put together the two, to harmonize the two amendments, and now we come up with only one amendment to the Annex 19, that it's also in full process to be treated into the ICAO systems. We didn't close yet the consultation with the states. It will be in end of October, and with the goal to have a final review November 2015, adoption by the Council also in March, but with the proposed applicability date 2018 or 2020 based on the responses that we will have from the Member States. And this is covering the bigger framework of SMS, SMP and all the safety management system. It's not only dedicated to accident investigation, but the exchange of information that will make possible the whole flow of data amongst the safety partners. In terms of our goal, we all recognize that a successful system of sharing information should be done through the SSP and SMS, because we really need to have a process that will give us, through the operational data coming from the service providers, the possibility to identify the hazards, to assess the risk, to find the best mitigation strategy, and to monitor and measure the improvements that we are putting in place. For this, we have some challenges, of course, because not all the states are able to give us sufficient information or to have access to the sufficient information. And this kind of operational context could prejudice the whole process that should address a global system that should connect all the stakeholders and to make possible the real exchange of information and real added value that the use of data should bring to the overall framework. In terms of information that we have from the smaller states or the states with low-level activities, also it's a challenge, because sometimes you cannot be able to de-identify necessarily the data coming from these states or from the area with low-level aviation activity. In terms of the strategies, it's clear that for us the most important thing is to try to put together and to aggregate data coming from different sources. And from the beginning, you should start with a good framework that will allow you to work on that. And the exchange of information is clearly one of the basic things that should be put in place in order to have access to all these sources of information. Not only the information coming from the states, we need all the stakeholders to participate in this, we need all the data that we can have, and this is important since the beginning that's why it's important at the beginning to set up a good framework that will allow us all together to participate in those efforts. In terms of ICAO initiative that we are trying to put in place now, we try to go in a direction where member states should have access to the data that could lead them to take real decision based on data. And we have our portal, the iStars, our exchange system, information exchange platform, where we have more than 20 applications on different areas and more than 2,000 users registered for this platform. And you can find here all kind of information and could be really customized for your specific case. You can benchmark your performance with your region or with the global figures. So we really try to help member states and all stakeholders to have access to those data and to try to take decisions based on this data. In terms of a new process that we are trying to put in place, a new tool, we are trying to address the implementation, because nowadays you know that a new initiative was launched and was supported by all member states of ICAO. The No Country Left Behind it's an initiative, it's a communication strategy that will focus our efforts toward implementation. We have more than 10,000 standards nowadays, and we really need to go in a direction where the states could really implement all those standards and be sure that we are going in the right direction. In terms of designing this, we try to put in place tools that will help the member states to really implement, to really prioritize their efforts, and to give information to the decision-making layer that will allow them to be able to take appropriate action when needed. And for that, we put it in place, the state safety briefing. It's a compendium of data that are customized for each and every member state. You have some indicators on the first page, not necessarily only the ICAO one, but we have also the EU safety list, we have IOSA, we have FAA categories. So bunch of indicators that help us identify the status, the real status of a country in terms of aviation. Coming to this first part, we have here the matrix where you can find the areas and the critical elements, and based on the USOAP audit, you come up with some findings. So far, we just had the standards, had the audits, we gave the findings to the states, and we waited for the states to come up with the corrective action plan, and all the effort that the states should make. We want to go further than that. So we put in place for each and every findings a database that will address and give you indication on guidance materials, will give you indication on the best practices that will address that specific finding, will give you the training associated with this specific area, and will let you know also what are the countries that solve in your region that specific findings, and you have the address and the contact of the people that are taking care of that specific area in that specific country. Based on that, we will come up with the product that will be somehow the state corrective action plan, and all this will try to go into evaluation into the cost database, where you can come up with the needs that state, where are the needs of the states today in terms of money, in terms of people, in terms of infrastructure. So the ideal will be to go to your Director General or to your minister and say, look, I need to put a certain amount of money, I need more people in this area, and a little bit of investment in my infrastructure. And I need a certain amount of resources to do that. If you are doing that today, you might have a return on investment based on the forecasted traffic that you have in your country, and you can really see the added value of investing in aviation today. If not, what is the cost of an accident and all associated issues that are coming from this one? All this will be structured and will be part of the same big enhanced state briefing, and this will represent a report of where you are as a state, what should be done in a prioritized way, how much will cost you, and this ideally will be presented to the Director General and Minister to have access to the status of the country and what should be done in that particular country. It will be a data-driven decision, and this will be very important for the states. This is the process behind the story. I want to highlight the fact that we will have a risk assessment done based on the state profile. For example, a small touristic island with no aviation, only an airport and an ANSP. The focus should be on the oversight of the airports and ANSP. I'm not so sure that if you don't have any kind of operation there, you need to be focused on the airworthiness operation or licensing. So the risk should be assessed, and we'll come up with the prioritization of the implementation measure. Also, we try to put in place a module that, based on the data that you have in a country, the number of AOCs, MROs, training organization, and all this, you come up with the necessary resources for your CAA. 3.8 airworthiness inspectors, 2.5 operational inspectors, because always in our audits we said you don't have as a CAA the necessary resources. But when the CAA come back and say, okay, how many people I should have in this particular area? I don't know, we don't know exactly. So we try to put in place this, and the help that EASA gave us in this respect, it was really helpful. We also have, our colleagues are preparing a module that will give you, based on the technology existent in your state right now to the airport and to the NSPs, the exact needs that you have today based on your traffic, and based on the forecasted traffic, what you need to implement in terms of modules of ASBUS or this kind of technology that you should take into account for the future, and will be optimized and will come up with a cost and with an added value. So all this will go into the global cost database that will come up with some data, because today it's easy for an airport to try to attract some money from the banks. Okay, you have an investment in the infrastructure, in the runway. You see that in 5 years, based on the traffic, you have the return of investment. If you go to ask money to improve safety, they'll say, yeah, safety is good, but how much money you can come up in 5 years based on your safety performance? If you go to your minister, they'll say, come on, in the last 10 years I had no accidents, so why I should put some more money in safety? So we are trying now to make a business case why you should invest in safety today and what will be the added value for this, the return of investment. So this is the kind of tool that we try to put in place, because what we need now is to try to manage the information that we have in order to really help the member states to assess their risk, to assess their needs. Because, you know, maybe the most evolved states don't need ICAO or EASA to tell them what to do. But the rest of them, they don't necessarily know what's the real needs in that particular country. And they come to ICAO and say, tell us what to do. And we try to tell them exactly what should be the way forward and where they should put their resources in order to get the expected results. In terms of the flow of data, for us it will be important to know that we have a mandatory framework, legal framework in place, the SMS and the SSP. And through this one, we can really build something that is very useful. In terms of service provider, I would love to see Council or IATA coming up with a basic set of KPI that will, for all their airlines, instead of having 700 sets of KPIs coming from airlines or 150 coming from ANSPs. All this will feed the FMS and the SMS, and on the other hand, through the ICAO and the EASA and the regulatory framework, we can set up the safety performance indicators that will feed our SSP. And if we put together all this, we can really have access to the real-time monitorization of the health of the system. Because this is the final goal, how to assess in real time what is the health of your aviation system. And I think that we should all put our data together in order to get this. We don't need to know the pilot, the ANSPs, the particular case. If we have, for example, an indicator defined by IATA on, I don't know, loss of control in flight, they come with the 5 precursors, I don't know, bank angle, low altitude alert and all this. It's de-identified, entering into the system, the SMS, SSP, and we want to create the applications together with our partners to be able to let the member states to have access to this data. Because right now, let's face it, even the states with more than 90% effective implementation, they just collect data, they don't analyze data. So we should put in place mechanisms that will help the member states to have their trends, to have their data, and to take decision based off of these trends and data. So this was my presentation. As I told you, we have a framework at the level of ICAO, and we try to attract people, mostly on voluntary basis right now, to participate in this. And you have the data and the exact page where you can go and be part of the global system that we want to put in place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catalin. As you probably noticed, we're working through our coffee break, and I think that's what we're going to continue to do. If anybody's gasping for a coffee, you can slip out and get yourself one. So I'm going to hand us straight up. We'll take questions at the end of this. I'm going to hand it straight over to Margus Rahoya now to talk for the European Commission.
Thank you very much. It is really difficult now to say something intelligent on the basis of what was said by Patricia and how Catalin put it in a world context, and of course our own agency EASA made all the points already. So I will just try to say one thing. The Commission is trying to be here but not on your way. I would say that is our starting point, and in that sense I would just make 3 points. First one is that over the past years the European system has started a transition toward a more proactive and evidence-based system. The second thing I would talk about the revision of the Basic Regulation 216, and then a third point I want to make is about the roadmap. So just looking into all this context, I think there is a very good place for, let's say, the European common rulemaking and activities. If I see what is done at the national level, what is done at the global level, it is all very good. And I think here our philosophy at the European level is very much to complement and have this, let's say, one more layer here and this layer would simplify rather than make more complexities. At least this is the idea. I think the industry, the public authorities, we're all required to handle more activities with less resources. To address this challenge, we need to be more efficient and to act where necessary for the enhancement of the safety. We can't afford to take decisions and actions addressing all actors in the same manner without assessing the impact it will have on their activity and the aviation sector safety in general. And this, let's say, intelligent approach was highlighted by all of you. This is notably the objective of the new occurrence legislation, which ensures that the framework to collect, analyze and follow up occurrences is in place in all aviation sectors, including those which are not required to put in place a safety management system. These rules also ensure that the aviation authorities, both at national and European level, are receiving the necessary information to support their oversight activities. You heard this morning from the Commissioner Bulc that we are preparing an aviation strategy that will include the revision of the so-called basic regulation. This proposal will aim at supporting the transition towards an evidence-based and more efficient safety system in the EU. In particular, it will respond to the calls of the Member States, industry and the airspace users for a more proportionate and flexible approach to safer regulation and to eliminate regulation which stifles entrepreneurship with too prescriptive requirements. It notably proposes to introduce a scalable framework which recognizes the differences existing between the various sectors of civil aviation and the risks involved in them. This approach is expected to benefit the whole aviation sector in the Union and will be particularly suited to the needs of small and medium-sized enterprises. I think this has been one of the discussions we have had for some years now, and we hope that with the change of the basic regulation, the approach to the SMEs will be more flexible. With the transition to a risk and performance-based approach to regulation and oversights, Member States and the agency will need to develop new skills and competencies, as well as to be continuously abreast with the latest technologies developed by the industry. So the revision of the basic regulation will support the achievement of these objectives by proposing better arrangements for coordination and development of the aviation research and training. It will also address the challenges that some national authorities face in maintaining and financing the resources necessary for accomplishing the required certification and oversight work. And in this regard, of course, the work that is done in ICAO and that Katalin was presenting is very much complementary and the thinking that we are having over here. To this end, the regulation will propose a framework for pooling and sharing of technical resources between the national authorities and the European Aviation Safety Agency, which includes the possibility of transforming responsibilities for implementation of EU legislation on a voluntary basis. I would like to ask Patricia, what do you say about that? But in the end, now, final point on the Commission roadmap, and then we can jump into the discussion and debate. Adopting the legal framework is an important aspect, but it is not the only one. To ensure that we are collectively able to enhance safety and prevent accidents, we need to go beyond rules to make them a reality on the ground. So the Commission has not always addressed stakeholders' needs to focus on implementation and provided support to them in this context. With the adoption of a roadmap to prepare for the implementation of the occurrence regulation, the Commission, with the support of EASA of course, has put a lot of efforts to ensure that when the new regulation will apply from 15th of November, all stakeholders, industry, Member States, general aviation community are provided with the necessary tools and guidance. I should mention in particular a few points. The preparation and development with strong involvement of the stakeholders of guidelines to support the implementation of the Regulation 376 of 2014 with aim to provide a common understanding on the implementation of the rules and where relevant propose possible means of compliance and present good practices. These guidelines will be finalized in the coming weeks and disseminated by the end of October. Second point, to the development and adoption by the industry, employers and staff of the European Corporate Just Culture Declaration, which was just signed this morning. The third point, the development of promotion material whose aim is to create incentive for people to report occurrences. Posters have been developed as well as leaflets informing potential reporters about reporting requirements and the protection granted to them under Just Culture provisions. They have been uploaded on the USB stick which had been distributed to you, so you are welcome to use it. We encourage you to use it and disseminate this material as you deem relevant. Few samples of leaflets and posters are also available to take away at the back of the room. The development and management of a website that will serve as a unique entry point for reporting of occurrences in the EU, as well as for information on issues related to the rules, the system and the Just Culture. This website should be active before the application date of the regulation. And finally, I strongly believe that all these initiatives, as well as the future aviation strategy, will contribute to enhance aviation safety and hereby support the efficiency and competitiveness of our industry. And I'm looking forward, together with other panelists, to discussing with you and answering any questions that, of course, you have. And I think it was good that I read the points, because then I have the messages through. Thank you very much.
Just time for one or two questions, comments or whatever. Patricia, I got the feeling that you might wish to add something.
So Margaret just asked me a question. I thought it might be polite to answer it. I think pooling and sharing is a really excellent idea. I definitely, it's something I've been supporting for a couple of years now. I note that you're talking about pooling and sharing on a voluntary basis, which I think is really important. But as a community, it can't make sense for all of us to try and replicate expertise on absolutely all topics. It must make sense for us to have some areas where we develop strengths in individual states and share those strengths with each other. The example that's always quoted in this conversation is around North Sea helicopters, where it simply wouldn't be sensible for every single state in the EU to have the kind of capability that's necessary if you're Norway or if you're the UK. So I think it's a brilliant initiative, and I'm all for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Janne Narvi from Finland. First of all, I welcome all the initiatives that they are ongoing at the moment on the regulatory side. They're really welcome. And I'm just waiting to see it all come through, which I hope also will come in the near future. And not in sarcastic way, but truly hoping to see it quickly. However, there's one thing that I wish that you could consider, and I've said this in ICAO Europe meeting also. The frontline operators who have the best possibility for immediate corrective actions and to make the safety, to correct all the incidents and the reasons for the incidents, they don't get the information from the regulators. We are in the loop of only being sucked information, to put it that way, and there is no 376, for instance, doesn't say that within 72 hours the regulator has to notify all the participants that are related to this or who are in concern. And I think that this is a very important factor because we are now talking with FABs, we are talking about Europe-wide context, so we are not facing the problem within Finland with the regulator at all. But when you go from country to country, we are facing these problems. And like Job was saying, we would really need the feedback. We don't have a visibility either to ISTARs, and that is also connected only to regulators or certain institutes, but not operators or things like that. So please consider this feedback loop also in the future work when we are planning the big databases and the other issues. They are vital.
This is indeed a fundamental point. We have mechanisms typically on airworthiness when there is an incident which is reported to us, we immediately inform all the operators of actions to be taken. It's in our legal mandate for airworthiness. We are trying to do something similar for other issues such as operational issues. If there is a repetitive, kind of trend that we see, we need to be able to inform all the different operators about this safety concern. One of the topics that we are looking at for the big data system is what kind of access do we grant to the industry stakeholders. And that comes back to Job's comment, which is if you provide data, you need to get a benefit out of it. And so our intention is to, of course, provide you with the analysis of your own data, but also the analysis of the aggregated data of your sector. We don't want to give Air France access to British Airways safety data, of course. We don't want Finavia necessarily to have access to safety data from DSNA or France. It doesn't make any sense. But what is your situation compared to all ANSPs in a similar type of problem? This is something we think is interesting. So this is what we intend to do.
Okay, I think we'll have to call it a halt there for this panel because we've got to get straight on with the next one. So can I have a round of applause to show your appreciation?